I am Ratnesh. I'm the Managing Director for Cambridge University Press, South Asia. Some of you who are, I can see everybody sitting here and, enjoy this whole moments of discussion is going to happen in so short while. I hope this discussion is very engaging. Give you a little brief about Cambridge University Press. We've been in existence for the last 400 years. We've been actually engaging with the scholars, academicians, educationists to create high quality scholarly work, the research and the books, which is really going to be across the different part of the geography. It has authors from different geographies. We have these books created and distributed in different parts of the world. Today we have an opportunity to relaunch a creation which is really have done very well in the last, and thank you very much, Venkat, to actually take out time and the panelists to be here to do a relaunch for the book. What I'm going to do is to actually quickly introduce the panelists here without taking much time. They don't need any introduction, but I'll do a very humble effort of introducing them. Mukul Kesavan, historian, novelist, political social essayist. He's also a Cambridge alum. So that's like, we being Cambridge University Press, we take a lot of pride in that. Dilip Simeon, a labor historian, public intellectual. Also, he's a chair of Aman Trust. Thank you very much, Dilip, taking our time. Ashok Malik, we always see him on TV or, in various debates. Very recently, he's been honored by Padam Shri in 2016. He's a senior Indian media person and columnist. Arif Mohammad Khan, a veteran politician, been a Minister of Civil Aviation and Energy. He's been a Member of Parliament multiple times in 1980, 1984, 89. Thank you very much for all of you being here. When I was personally reading this book, and we create a lot of books and journals, this book, what did it take me back to the school days. And I remembered a very poem that time when we've actually, this whole poem on partition. And there's a very little script which you see on the net on Sir Richard Radcliffe. But I thought it's for me to quote some script from that poem, which really sets the tone for the discussion which is going to happen in the evening. So allow me just a minute or two to just read out this small bit of excerpt from that poem. It says, "Shut up in a lonely mansion with police night, day patrolling the gardens to keep assassins away. He got down to work to the task of settling the fate of millions. The maps at his disposal were out of date and the census returns almost certainly incorrect. But there was no time to check them, no time to inspect contested areas. The weather was frightfully hot and bout of dysentery kept him constantly on trout. But in 7 weeks it was done. The frontiers decided, a continent for better or worse divided. The next day he sailed for England, where he quickly forgot the case, as good lawyer must. Return he not, afraid as he told his club that he might get shot." This was Partition 1966 by W.H. Auden on Sir Richard Radcliffe. With that, I will pass it over to Venkat to take forward the session and have a very dynamic and participative discussion today. Thank you.
Thank you, Kesavan, and it's fallen to me to moderate today's discussion. Let me say, first of all, that there are many things you can say about a book. You can say it's good, it's bad, it's excellent, it's wonderful. There are very few books of which you can say, this is an important book. This is an important book. It's a book which stands out for the richness of its sources, especially the Urdu sources. It's a book that stands out for the clarity in which the main problem is set out. It's a book also which is secondarily hugely interesting for the way in which it returns someone we don't associate with partition, namely Dr. Ambedkar, center stage to the way in which the idea of partition was debated and constituted in the 1940s. I'm not going to say any more about it because the main statement of what the book is about should belong to its author. Just to say very briefly, in terms of housekeeping, that Venkat will start and take about 10 minutes with which to state what his book does. And then we'll go around the table and my fellow panelists will speak for 7 or 8 minutes about why they think the book is interesting. Hopefully these interventions will end in questions that were raised in their minds about the book. So we aren't here as individual speech makers, we are here as Venkat's interlocutors, and after we have said our piece, Venkat will respond to the questions raised. There'll be a conversation, and then we'll open it up to the House. Venkat.
Yeah, thank you, Mukul. Thank you all for coming, and I'd like to thank all the panelists for agreeing to, grace the occasion today. I'll try to be very brief to kind of lay out the overall argument of the book and also to locate it in the field of partition historiography, or not just historiography, the field of partition studies. Broadly, I would say that if you look at the field, there are two poles which kind of dominate the field, if not exhaust it. On the one hand, you have an obsessive interest in the high politics of the partition, looking at the motivations, the tactics, the strategies of the principal actors in this whole partition drama, Mr. Jinnah, Gandhi, Nehru, and others. And the whole focus is on trying to figure out who are the heroes and the villains of the partition, who was responsible for it. And so you have, on the one hand, Ayesha Jalal making the argument about how Pakistan is this bargaining counter, which was never meant to be kind of realized. And it happens in those mad months in 1947. If there is a pushback from the other side, it is those who believe that Mr. Jinnah was serious, he wasn't quite bluffing when it came to the question of Pakistan, and how he very skillfully goes about achieving it. And so, well, the heroes and the villains change here. So Mr. Jinnah then becomes the arch-villain. Now, on the other hand, broadly speaking, you have what are called approaches from below, seeking to try and capture the pain, the suffering, the experiences of people who actually went through this thing, trying to get away from great man history because it is something which is now seen as a very puerile exercise in trying to create the biography of the nation state, whose coming to existence has itself been so violent. Not to mention the fact that even after it comes into existence, it doesn't do a whole lot of good to the masses of people. However, if you look at these two competing poles in the field, they do share a particular common assumption. And the assumption is that the idea of Pakistan remains this very vague thing. Nobody knows what it actually means, what it exactly stands for. And so the millions of people either supporting Pakistan or even opposing Pakistan do it without quite understanding its meanings or implications. So the question that struck me is that if we are, to kind of use Amartya Sen's, phrase, which has been quite, flogged to death, if we are an argumentative society, if the Indian is an argumentative entity, how come this whole idea of Pakistan remains vague right from the time when it is first seriously put forth by the Muslim League in Lahore 1940 all the way to 1947? And so, looking at the debate, so what I tried to do was to kind of track how the idea of Pakistan is articulated, debated, discussed, fought over in the public sphere. And I picked up on UP, which is arguably the place where the idea of Pakistan receives its earliest, most sustained and overwhelming support. And I tried to understand what exactly is happening here. And what really stunned me, and I wasn't prepared for it, was to see a very intelligent, sophisticated, a wide-ranging and a very passionate debate on the question of Pakistan, in which its meaning and implications are being thrashed out in the columns of the newspapers, through pamphlets, public meetings, political conferences, and there's one or a dozen happening any particular week in the UP, during this period. And what I argue is that Pakistan doesn't remain a vague idea, according to the sources that I have looked at. And the way the Muslim League articulates it articulates it in terms of an ideal Islamic state, a new Medina, as some call it. And I pick up this phrase from Maulana Shabbir Ahmad Usmani, an important figure who's not found his place in partition historiography thus far. That this is going to be an ideal Islamic state. It's not just going to be a homeland for Indian Muslims, but indeed this is going to be the major Islamic power in 20th century world, something which is going to pick up the baton which has been dropped by the Turks at the end of World War I after the caliphate has collapsed. What you also see is that this articulation, as far as Pakistan is concerned, is ferociously opposed by a section of the Deobandi ulama, a dominant section of the Deobandi ulama, along with their allies in the Congress. Broadly we call them nationalist Muslims, who question how can Pakistan be even a viable state to begin with, how can it become Islamic, and who is Mr. Jinnah to lead it into this glorious Islamic utopia. So you have this debate as far as Pakistan is concerned, which is fairly widespread. It's not just happening in rarefied circles. You find reverberations of it at the ground level also, and one of the ways in which I find out about this is I track a debate on Pakistan in this newspaper called Medina, which is a very prestigious newspaper. It's a nationalist Muslim newspaper which comes out of Bijnor. And in 1942 there is a debate on the question of Pakistan in which happens after the editor opens up the columns of this newspaper to the readers, asking them what do they understand by Pakistan, do they oppose it, do they support it, so on and so forth. So you have a flood of responses, and the editor says they come from as far east as Chittagong, as far west as Bombay, and as far south as Raichur in the Deccan. And out of this flood of responses, he picks up two most cogent essays, one by a person opposing the idea of Pakistan and one by a person supporting the idea of Pakistan, and serializes them over. And so this debate happens over several weeks. Now, the other thing that I try to do in this book is to talk about how is this idea of, how is this debate actually inaugurated. And the thing which really struck me was the person who really inaugurates it is missing as far as partition historiography is concerned. Nobody associates him with the debate on Pakistan, and that's Ambedkar. And it's Ambedkar who in 1940, and it's astounding that the Lahore Resolution is passed in March 1940, and by August he has a 400-page manuscript on Pakistan, which really sets the ball rolling, and the Muslim League has to respond to Ambedkar's book. So this is what I do in the book. I think I'm done with 10 minutes, and I think I'll stop here.
Okay.
Great.
Thank you. Would you like to take this forward?
Yeah. Thank you for this opportunity. At the outset, I'd say that this is, within my limited knowledge and reading, one of the most important books on the ideology of communalism in the 1940s. I stress the word ideology. It's a book about ideology and ideas. It's not a history of partition. And he doesn't pretend that it is. And I hope that he will go on to do further research in that direction. And that's how it should be seen. It would be too much to even attempt to summarize any of the things here, but I want to stress certain approaches. And first and foremost, I'd say that, Pakistan was meant to be a solution to the communal problem in the minds of many people. It's fairly evident that such a solution does not exist. It didn't happen that way. And whatever was the imagination of Pakistan, something else has transpired. We don't have to go into that now. What I would like to say is that given the situation that we are in now, we need more desperately than ever to have a non-polemical debate about communalism and the history of the ideas that went into the partition of India. We need sorry, I'm sorry, I'll talk, keep it closer. So we need a non-polemical debate. Most debates in our country tend to be polemical. You know, polemic is the Greek word for strife. So you don't really have a conversation. You have a screaming match and you hurl accusations and so on. That's very unfortunate, but especially about communalism, this is a pathology. And maybe the pathology is due to the deep sense of guilt, shame, nostalgia, etc. that accompanies partition. And maybe we are still incapable of having an honest and forthright conversation about it. But what I will say is that this book has opened up the possibility of having a conversation. You may disagree with some of its contents, but a lot of the time he's just reporting. He's reporting and he's done a huge amount of meticulous research on various different schools of thought. And so let me just identify some of the issues here. I have seen in public debates and all regarding Venkat's book, and I first heard him in a seminar in Teen Murti some years ago when he was still working on it, the almost visceral response to his arguments. And I was quite taken aback at this kind of response. And at one stage I realized what was happening. It was assumed that Venkat was taking a stereotypical position on Muslims and the teleological aspect of Muslim politics, that it was always going in the direction of separatism and partition. It was assumed that this is what he's arguing. Now, you know, in India, we have a habit of using communal language. We haven't recovered from it. We'll say, the Sikhs killed Indira Gandhi. We'd say, the Muslims divided India. We say, the Hindus, you know, had a riot in Gujarat. But the Hindus, the Sikhs, the Christians, this kind of language is communal. Two Sikhs killed Indira Gandhi, not the Sikhs. But we almost automatically talk like this. And therefore, even while I was teaching modern Indian history years and years ago, I would first specify that you cannot say the Muslims divided India. Okay, some Muslims were interested in the division and some Muslims were not interested, and you have to historically examine what it was. You know, in any case, India, there was not even adult suffrage for everybody in 1947. So to say that the Muslims made this decision is patently false. However, there was the Muslim communal movement. And there are many people who insist that there was no such thing as a Muslim communal movement. This thing just happened by accident. It happened because of high politics. And so it becomes a screaming match between who did it. You know, you did it or we did it. You know, Nehru and Patel and Jinnah are the guilty party, or I mean, either the Muslim leaders are the guilty party or vice versa. Now this, I feel this is not a historical way. This is a polemical way of conducting this debate. It's not historical. So this is one thing. So Venkat's book is not got a teleological argument. It's not arguing that this was a set pattern and going inevitably in a certain direction. He's not arguing that. And you have to read, it's a very, very detailed argument. You have to pay attention to it and see. He's highlighted all those Muslim alim who are arguing from within the theological perspective against Pakistan. Just as much he has shown you what the arguments were from each side. So it's not a one side. So he's doing the opposite of what he's accused of doing. Rather than say that there was no debate and the Muslim politics was going inevitably in the direction of Pakistan, he's doing the opposite. He's saying that was not inevitable, and in fact there was a big debate. So this is enough for that. I'll just make a few more points and stop. Secondly, there is a very major kind of objection, and this arises from a fundamental confusion. People did not know what partition is going to lead to, what it's going to result in. Correct? But that's not, that doesn't mean that the matter was not discussed. As a scholar of Russian history, let me tell you that the communist movement and the social democratic movement had threadbare discussions on the nature of working class revolution, the peasant question, the agrarian question, threadbare discussions, but nobody knew what's going to happen after 1917. So it doesn't follow that because nobody knew what is going to happen afterwards, uske repercussions kya hone ja rahe, and that therefore it was not discussed. It was discussed and they didn't know. There is a certain philosophical assumption we have, which is part of the whole Hegelian Marxist heritage, that doctrinal agreement leads to foreknowledge of the events. It leads to nothing of the kind. You can have a well worked out party program and still have no idea what's going to happen, because this assumption is false, that we can calculate the result of our actions is false. We can't. Having said that, let me just make one or two more points. The nation is an almost impermeable concept to analyze. Sociologically, politically, the concept of nation is something very difficult to define. People think they're defining it, and so you come across, say Stalin's definition dominates the left-wing tradition. Stalin had certain, but when you look at it carefully, it just melts into thin air. It just floats off. You just can't pin it down. You cannot have a kind of algebraic mathematical definition of the nation. And the power of Ambedkar's use, it's a very interesting contrast to contrast Ambedkar's arguments on Pakistan with the Communist Party's arguments on Pakistan. And the Communist Party was, these things are not discussed sufficiently, and that's what I mean by saying we should have a non-polemical debate. You know, the Communist Party of India came out with the resolution in 1942. It's called the Adhikari Resolution, which argued that Pakistan was a just and democratic demand. And the nature of the argumentation contained there is really astonishing and very, very confusing. And that's when I realized that with dialectics you can prove anything you like. And when you look at it carefully and you contrast it with what Ambedkar is saying, Ambedkar is paying greater stress on the psychic element, on the emotional element. So he argues against Pakistan very clearly. He said it's a complete chimera and nonsense. But he says if people feel in a certain way, they are going to, you cannot stop it. It's a very interesting argument. One can't summarize it like this, but it really bears reading as an archival text, because it's full of all kinds of presumptions, stereotypical language. At the same time, it's a really rich book, well worth reading. So the point I'm saying is that the concept of the nation is very, very unclear. And in this debate, there are many very rich contributions made by people which we haven't discussed. And Venkat's book provokes us to go into. For instance, Rajendra Prasad wrote a book called India Divided. In that he says, sidesteps the whole issue of multinational and national. He says, why can't we have a multinational state? Why forget about nation state? It's a very interesting argument, well worth reading. Finally, this concept of majority and minority, we have accepted it completely. This is an ideological concept. Every time you use the word minority, you are underlining someone's inferior status. And this is an ideological term. It's ideologically loaded. It's just an empty arithmetic. You don't know what you're referring to unless you're clear what you're counting. In India, we are always counting Hindus and Muslims. But why are we always doing that? That's the issue. So the very use of the word majority and minority, this is what Chaudhry Muhammad Ali, in 1911, he used a very fascinating phrase which I think is really important. He said, we are in the grip of the philosophy of number. And when you look at the arguments, even of the staunch secular people who are opposed to communism, the communists, I've got a series of four communist documents with me of the 1940s. One document is even arguing for a separate Sikh state in central Punjab. These were the years between 1942 and 1947 when they were saying, you know, the nationalities should have their sovereign states. The whole thing is full of numbers. There's so many Sikhs here, there are so many Muslims here, they're counting numbers, statistics. So we are in the grip of this numerical philosophy. And this is what communalism is. So we have a really very, very gripping book here, which enables us to pierce through all this. I've made these initial comments without going into the contents of the book, because this is not the occasion, it's not like we're having a seminar. But I just want to alert you to the fact that this book will make you think. And it will make you think about some very grievous issues in Indian politics which are still lively today. And so once more, I congratulate Venkat for writing this.
Thank you, Dilip. Ashok?
Thank you so much, Mukul. Thank you, Venkat, for inviting me. Thank you, Cambridge. One of the reasons I accepted Venkat's generous offer, Venkat's generous offer to speak here was because I actually hadn't read this book. It had been on my to-do list for a year and a half. And when he did email me some weeks ago, I said, this gives me the opportunity to actually read and finish this book, which I actually did this morning. I've been reading it for the past week, but I finished it this morning. The best books, in my opinion, are not books that answer every question, because no book can, but books that open up more questions. And this book, with its very rich marshalling of archival material, with opening up so many provocative points of view, has actually left me with more questions than it has actually answered, and I mean that in the best possible way. There are at least 3 books which can be written following from this book, looking at the same material, looking at more material which Venkat no doubt has. Maybe Venkat will write all 3 of those books, maybe others will, but there are several books which flow out of this, and this is a book which grows on you. It starts off slowly. You actually wonder where it's headed, but by the end of it, you don't want it to end because it concludes brilliantly. The book, to my mind, makes 2 central arguments. It makes many arguments, but the 2 central arguments to my mind were that post 37, when the Congress won the provincial elections, especially in the United Provinces or UP, especially post 39, when the Congress, for some crazy reason, resigned from those governments because India had been led into the war. And following the resolution of 1940, Pakistan emerged not as some vague idea, but it was discussed threadbare within Muslim society. Arguments made for and against a separate nation, whether by Hindus, whether by non-Muslims, whether by Muslims themselves, were discussed, were responded to. There was a lively debate. He takes us through and delineates all of that. And every attribute of contemporary Pakistan, its achievements such as they are, its failings such as they are, were discussed, anticipated in that period, more or less. That goes against the grain of some of the other books we've read, including Aisha Jalal's book, which, to be honest, I was never completely convinced by. But I think Venkat has done a very good job of placing the facts before us, and he's been very persuasive, to my mind. His next argument is that, especially in 1946, when you had provincial elections where the League did well, especially among Muslim voters, and even among Muslim voters who didn't actually vote then, or on issues that were not up for vote, because it wasn't really a referendum on Pakistan. Muslims in India knew what they were voting for. Muslims in India who supported the idea of Pakistan knew what was in it for them, in it for India, in it for the subcontinent, in it for Pakistan, because all of this had been discussed threadbare. Like Dilip, I'm not completely convinced of that, because it is one thing to have all the facts and the hypothesis before you. It's another to actually know what you're heading for when you vote. If I could give something which is not as dramatic and perhaps not apposite, but if I could give the example of the Brexit vote, where if you speak to 5 people who voted to leave, you'll get 5 very different reasons for why they voted to leave, not one of which has actually been realized or is likely to be realized. Of course, Venkat could disagree with me when I say that I'm not too convinced of that argument about 1946, but that part of the charm of the book. Ambedkar has already been referred to by all of the previous speakers, and to me he really emerges as a very arresting character in the book. In 4 months he produces a 400-page book or pamphlet or thesis, which essentially sets the frame for all future debate on Pakistan. He welcomes it, he repudiates it, he dismisses the League's fantastic projections, he dismisses the Congress's sentimentalism. He makes an argument, if you like it, for Pakistan. He makes an argument, if you like it, against Pakistan. He is mischievous, he is puckish, he is brilliant. That in itself is a revelation. That one chapter where Venkat talks about Ambedkar and the constitutional lawyer from Bombay and the manner in which he is responded to it's worth a book in itself. It's fascinating. Then you move to Nehru and the Congress. Nehru is a man I have a great regard for, but the more you read about him, the more you wonder how he lasted in politics for half a century. Because his response to the League in 1937, his response to Muslim mobilization in UP, in setting up a Muslim mass contact program, which you can see was never going to take off. because the manner in which it was done, the agencies that were used, the individuals that were used, which was just never going to work. And I don't want to reveal more than that, but that in itself is also worth reading, how the Congress leadership of the time completely misread and misjudged the emotional pull of the Pakistan slogan, or of the Muslim separatist slogan. And of course, like in previous books, you do wonder why the Congress resigned in 39, and more so what they were thinking in 1942. My final point, unlike three of the people here, I'm not a historian. I did once flirt with the idea of a career in academia, but academia quickly threw me out. My background is in political journalism, and I've spent some 25 years covering politics and elections in UP. So when I read this book, I approached it as a student of history. I also approached it as a political journalist. I'm not trying to draw comparisons between today's UP and the debates in the United Provinces in the 1940s, not at all. That would not be fair in any manner. But when I hear words like polemical, I hear words like screaming match, I hear words like rhetorical, I hear words like vileness to the language, all of which have been used by my co-panelist, I'm not surprised, because while these people were post facto the giants of history, and some of them were giants of history, they were also in the 1940s, frankly, short-termist, sometimes small-timer, some often mean-spirited politicians. Often not realizing the implications of what they were saying and not thinking things through 30 or 40 years down the line, which is why much of the pamphleteering, much of the rhetoric, the speeches, the strong statements of the time, which would leave a serious historian aghast, if you've covered politics in this part of the world, would have you saying things haven't changed, have they? I'll stop there.
Thanks, Ashok, for that very cogent presentation. Khan sir.
Thank you very much. First, I would like to say that I read the book about a year back. And I found the very profound work. It becomes very important because there are many few books, including this one, who have relied heavily on Urdu sources, a language which is now not many people who read or who can understand. Understand, everybody understands. Who can read the language? In fact, last night I was really surprised when I showed Venkat Ji a book and he started reading it. I said, how come? I said, do you know Urdu? And where did you learn it? He said, in USA. So from that angle, I find this book very important, full of facts. In fact, one small book which has been written by late Professor Mushirul Haq, the ex-Vice Chancellor of Kashmir University, who was killed by terrorists. I could see a lot of similarities in the theories between that book and this book. And this is a much voluminous work. But Venkat Ji, I would like to say, not from a critical angle, but I would like to make this point about the title of the book, Creating a New Medina. You are absolutely justified, because the ideologue of Pakistan, the religious, the cleric, Shabbir Ahmad Usmani, has used the term. But when we say creating a new Medina, then we must remember that the Prophet, the reference is to the Prophet, migration to Medina, and setting up a polity there, the concept of nation state was not there at that point of time anywhere in the world. There were either empires or the tribal societies. Nation state was not there. So naturally the reference is to that event. Now for 13 years, you read any book which we call in Urdu or Arabic Sira books, the biography of the Prophet. For 13 years, he and more than him, his followers, were subjected to worst persecution, worst conceivable persecution. And in the 13th year, they had finally decided to physically eliminate him. And the strategy was made that because this was a society where tribal laws were enforced, if you kill somebody, the killer will be killed by the tribe of the one who has been killed. Therefore, they decided that they will draft one young man from each tribe of Makkah, and all of them together will attack the Prophet and will kill him, so that his tribe is in no position to fight all the tribes of Makkah. Now all these youngsters, one each from different tribe, they were camping outside his home when he left the place, then took shelter in a cave, and then finally the day he leaves Makkah, it's very important, and it is mentioned in almost all major books on biography of Prophet, that he stands up, and if you allow me, I will use it in Urdu. He stands up and he says, Makkah, मुझे दुनिया में तू सबसे प्यारा है. I love you more than any other place in the world because this is his birthplace. So I love you. The love for the place of your birth is so evident, so obvious. You are more dear to me than any other place in the world. But your sons, they want to take my life. They don't allow me to live here. With these words of lament, sadness, he leaves Makkah and goes to Medina. He does not go on his own. He has been forced to migrate. Whereas in the case of Pakistan movement, they were not being forced to go there. They said, we cannot live with Hindus. Not only our religions are different, our social systems are different, our morals and ethics are different. I mean, these are two cases, two poles apart. In fact, I find the whole thing, the total distortion of religion, rather lack of understanding of religion. In fact, I have already taken 2 minutes more. There's one beautiful anecdote from those times. Feroz Khan, who was a great leader of Muslim League from Punjab, he addressed a meeting here at Ramlila Maidan, warning the British government, अगर तुम पाकिस्तान नहीं दोगे तो हम चंगेज खां और हलाकू खां बन जाएंगे. Next day, Ataullah Shah Bukhari, who was a leader of Ahrar, and he was against partition, he addressed a meeting and he was a great speaker. Now, Ataullah Bukhari says in his speech, he says कि चंगेज और हलाकू के नाम के आखिर में खान लगे होने से फिरोज खान नून को ये गलत फहमी हो गई है कि वो शायद मुसलमान थे. Whereas the fact is that Changiz Khan and Halaku, they demolished all the Muslim principalities, including the caliphate in Baghdad. This was the understanding. Therefore, when you say, I have absolutely no doubt that Jinnah, being a very intelligent man, very successful lawyer. He had given full thought to it. But I have very doubt if anybody other than him. And that's why he had left the field so confused. He allowed everybody to imagine Pakistan of his own thinking. But everybody had thought about it? No, I do not feel. Even Jinnah, typical lawyer's approach. Because when I read the biography of Fatima Jinnah, then she says after the early days of the partition of Pakistan, when this huge bloodshed was going on, people were being killed in thousands. She says in her biography that in the morning on the dining table when we would have our breakfast, then Jinnah was not able to stop his tears, but he wanted to hide those tears from me. Therefore, he would pick up the newspaper and place between me and him, and then take out his hanky from his pocket and wipe his tears. The man was not aware of the consequence. He was a very successful lawyer. And the way a successful lawyer deals with his brief, he was dealing with the partition movement. He had never envisaged what are going to be the consequences. And the very fact that today, not only Aisha Jalal, even if you go to the YouTube, hear the interview of Justice Javed Iqbal, son of Allama Iqbal, you know, his words are ringing words. He says, Pakistan हमने नहीं बनाया, Pakistan तो हिंदुओं ने बनाया है. And then not only that, further he says, हम तो इस लायक हैं ही नहीं कि कुछ बना सकें. The very fact that even those who supported Pakistan, or who are the just I'm finishing, or who are the successors of that movement, even they are today trying to give arguments that we are not responsible for it. It conclusively proves that this was something evil which happened, unfortunately. And now we must be, but we have today no alternative. I would like to conclude with this beautiful Urdu couplet. वो वक्त भी देखे हैं तारीख की घड़ियों ने, लम्हों ने खता की थी, सदियों ने सजा पाई. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Khasab. It remains for me to briefly exercise my prerogative as a panelist to just indicate why I think this book is important and the principal questions that it raises. Let me cut to the chase straight away. The reason why this book is so significant and the reason why some of the responses to it have treated it as so provocative is this. As Venkat sets out early in the book, there was at one time a kind of consensus that partition in 1947, or that when the elections of 1945 were held and people voted in those elections, these elections were treated as a virtual referendum. While they were provincial elections, they were by no means a referendum. There was no single question put. The British, in a sense, organized these elections to know who represented the Muslims. And the Muslim League, which campaigned almost exclusively on the platform of a separate state, namely Pakistan, won these elections. Now, a large part of the historical output about this particular event has been sometimes a series of defensive apologetics, which is to say that the reason why the Muslim League won these elections was because only a Muslim elite had the right to vote, which was true because the franchise was based upon education and income tax and landholdings. The second move was to say that, and this is the one that Venkat addresses most frontally, was to say that the premise of the demand or the shape of the demand or the contours of Pakistan were not categorically stated. They were left vague so that people could fill into them, so that Muslims could fill into them their discontents. And therefore, this vote was, in a sense, an inchoate vote of an expression of discontent rather than a positive vote for partition. So what Venkat does in the crucial sections of this book is to read extensively both the national debate on partition after the Lahore resolution at the all India level, and then specifically go to UP, because UP is widely acknowledged as the intellectual powerhouse of the Pakistan movement, and to try and show conclusively by using Urdu journalism, by using correspondences, by using polemical works and pamphlets written at this time, to try and show that far from this being a vague, unstated, deliberately indefinite demand, by the time we are finished, by the time the elections of 45 come about, this matter has been thrashed out. The Muslim League has a consensual position. Muslim League leaders at every level, whether the Mufassil or otherwise, are on message. They are saying to the Muslims of UP, we know that you can't be a part of Pakistan. The arguments they offer to encourage them nonetheless to vote for Pakistan is that A, you have to sacrifice something for the community of Muslims in the subcontinent. Jinnah says this in very dramatic ways. He says, I'm willing to let 2 crores of Muslims in the minority provinces be smashed. And he says this openly. The other argument made is the hostage theory, which is to say that, don't worry, there will be a sufficiency of non-Muslims in Pakistan and their welfare will be at stake if the Hindu rulers of divided India mistreat you. Venkat basically says that, look, there is a categorical position. This is a position being made not just by elite leaders, this is being made in akhadas in the Mohalla, this is being made within the Indian informational order that C.A. Bailey has written about. So you can't turn your face from the fact that this is a categorical position. It is presented to the voters, and a majority of voters vote for the Muslim League. Now, the reason why the response to this is sometimes defensive is partly because of a kind of chivalric position. The chivalric position is that we cannot, in a sense, hold the Muslims of UP culpable for making a choice which seems to be informed by a rank separatism. Right? So the important thing to say here is that we can judge whether Venkat has gotten this right or not, or whether he has marshaled a sufficiency of evidence to make his case. But the one thing that Venkat makes us confront is the fact that we cannot treat historical actors in the 1940s, we cannot hold, in a sense, the people of India today hostage to their choices. Regardless of whether they chose Pakistan or not, this should make no difference to the way in which the Republic of India deals with its citizens, whether so-called minority ones or so-called majority ones. The questions that this book raised for me were that, first of all, I think Venkat does a wonderful job in reading the vernacular Urdu literature and telling us what it actually says. There are a series of very, very rich summaries of the pamphlet literature, of the correspondence, which give you a real flavor of the cut and thrust of arguments over Pakistan at this time. But the questions that it raises are this. One, like Ashok, I'm not completely persuaded that the categorical statement of a problem by a political party is always received by the people who vote for that political party as its singular message. I mean, if in a sense you're disenchanted with the Congress over a period of 10 years in UP, and if the Congress, by a species of lunatic default, has decided to opt out effectively of the 1940s by first resigning ministries and then undertaking what is possibly the most wrong-headed mass movement that the world has seen, namely the Quit India movement in 1942, effectively what you have is, in the 1940s, a vacancy, a vacuum. The Muslim League, at a time when the colonial state was desperate for aid in the war effort, has a free hand. And I would merely say, one of the things that occurred to me in response to this argument was that, look, there is no counter-argument made. The counter-argument that is made by allies of the Congress, which is the Deobandis, the dominant faction of the Deobandis. The Congress gets out of jail in late 1944. It literally lumbers disoriented into this election, and it is wiped out. And the reason it's wiped out is not just because it's been jailed. This is part of it. It's also wiped out because there's a longer history to the relationship of the Congress with the Muslims of UP that dates back at least to 1937. The question that I have in mind is whether the statements about Pakistan are as categorical as Venkat sometimes argues. For example, using the internal evidence of your book, you state that there is some variability in whether all of Punjab and all of Bengal will be part of Pakistan or not. And you say that Jinnah's formal position right up to June 1947 is that both of them will, and there'll be a corridor that actually connects these two wings of Pakistan that will go through northern UP. Let me suggest that while it is clear from this that UP will not be a part of this, this whole notion of an enormous western and a very large eastern Pakistan linked with a corridor does in a sense mitigate the sense of geographical remoteness and distance that would be truly stark if the option they were offered was what Jinnah called a moth-eaten Pakistan. You make the point that there are several people within UP who are actually considering a partition Punjab and a partition Bengal. But from what you say, it's also the case that there are many who are not. And Jinnah never resolves from this position till the end. So it seems to me that there is a multiplicity of voices, quite apart from the question of how these voices are eventually received. And I think what Ashok says is well taken. The sense of buyer's remorse after Brexit, I think, you speak eloquently of the informational order in India, citing Bailey. The truth is that in a country like Britain, in a connected world, where there was a superabundance of information, the almost jokey conclusion to the Brexit thing that after the vote, the most Googled term was what is in fact the EU, tells us something about the incompleteness with which, or as someone pointed out, that foreknowledge is not the same as understanding the consequences of what you do. So, these are a couple of the questions that occur to me. I'd just like to end by saying, I'd also like to thank you for the richness of your documentation of the Pakistan movement, because one of the things that it instructs you in is the vileness of sectarian discourse. I mean, to read the mobilization for Pakistan, and this is quite apart from arguments we could make about the mistakes the Congress made, bad faith within the Congress, Hindu majoritarianism. If we take all this as read, it's still a kind of morality tale to read this detailed, rich recounting of the arguments for Pakistan. The swaggering machismo of it, the claim to the superiority of one faith over another, the completely thuggish argument about a hostage theory to secure the future of Muslims in minority provinces. I think what it teaches us is, and we should not shrink from what this teaches us, is that all mobilizations based upon religious identity are almost necessarily vile in their rhetoric, because they imply a division and they explicitly claim a superiority that must necessarily lead to these dreadful conclusions. I'm now going to hand over to Venkat so that he can respond to our ravings. Okay. And then we'll open it up.
Okay. Thank you, Mukul, and thank you, Khan Sahab, Ashok, Dilip. I'll try and remember some of the questions you raised. I'll begin with what you said because you're the last. Yeah, I'll begin with responding to what you just, the questions that you just raised because you're the last and I remember what you just said. I think the book needs to be looked at in a particular context in which the assertion, or rather the axiomatic truth in the field has been that this thing is completely vague. Nobody knows what this thing Pakistan is, that you're free to imagine it in as many ways as you possibly can. And what I'm arguing is that's an exaggeration. There is an understanding around a few sets of claims, let's say. So this is not as free-floating and or as vague a thing as it has been made out to be. That there is some amount of precision, thinking going on in terms of what are going to be the implications, the laying out of different positions and these positions being actually communicated to a wider audience. Sure, in this case, given the fact that the elections are based on a very limited franchise, about 15% max, but still looking at the mobilization that is happening, it's not just the 15% who are showing up at public meetings of either the Congress or the Muslim League. This becomes a show of strength for all the parties involved here. And so one suspects that the message may have kind of gone out to a larger population than we would be willing to acknowledge for various reasons. So in that sense, yes, Mr. Jinnah, his public position is that, yeah, I'm going to have full provinces, and, of course, he'll complain about moth-eaten provinces. But what I also was struck by, and nobody is kind of, at least as far as the reviews of the book are concerned, nobody has picked up on this. Liaquat Ali Khan, and I bring this up, has this meeting with an American diplomat in which he is willing to let go of, Eastern Punjab and Western Bengal, including the city of Calcutta. And for a senior functionary of the Muslim League, second in command to Mr. Jinnah, to be kind of talking about it to an American diplomat about it, you feel that maybe this was a kind of, the inside policy, or the inside, this is what they're kind of ultimately aiming at. They're probably going to, bargain for a lot more, but settle for this. So this was something which really struck me, because till now, it's only Khaliquzzaman who's kind of raised this issue in his memoirs, but this gets substantiated by Liaquat Ali himself. I'm sorry, what was your question? I'm sorry, I forget. Or do you? Okay. So I would say that, there is a lot greater precision, or that there is thinking going on, that we are not sleepwalking into the quicksands of the partition, as I write somewhere. It's not like we're just walking off the cliff like lemmings, unthinkingly. There is a lot of cogitation, a lot of thinking, and publicly, this is happening out there. So yeah. That's it.
Yeah, I think we should just open this out. Questions, please raise your hands. Shashi. Can I have other hands, please? Bhagwan, yeah. There is one.
Thanks. This is utterly fascinating, and thank you all for a very rich and stimulating discussion. So, Venkat, as I understand it, you've traced the ideological or the ideas-based underpinnings of what became the Pakistan movement, but isn't that still compatible with the argument, which Mukul largely made already, that essentially what happened was only made possible by the series of tactical missteps between the elections of 1937, in which the Muslim League won a very small fraction of Muslim votes, and the elections of 46, where they swept a majority of Muslim votes. And that if it weren't for those tactical mistakes, these ideas would have remained ideas. I mean, there are lots of ideas floating around India at that time, various things were being advocated, and that these ideas would never have had the chance to be translated in this way if, for example, the Congress hadn't resigned, thereby leaving all provincial governments to the patronage opportunities given to the Muslim League by the British, who frankly were able to buy off a hell of a lot of support in that process. Secondly, the Quit India movement and the jailings that followed, which meant they had no radios, no newspapers for the first 2 years of their imprisonment. They sort of emerged blinking into the sunlight from jail with no sense of what was going on. They were completely out of touch with the progress the League had made. So these tactical errors, as you know, the one place in 46 which, the places that didn't really vote for the League were the places that have now become Pakistan. Northwest Frontier Province won by Khan Sahib and the Congress Party. So, and then you have the Unionist Party in Punjab, and you've got the Krishak Mazdoor Party in Bengal, and so on. So the question is, there surely were enough arguments that if it were not for these circumstantial elements, these ideas could have remained ideas. And finally, how do you reconcile this intellectual underpinning with Jinnah's famous speech to the Pakistan Constituent Assembly, where he seemed to repudiate the very notion that Muslims couldn't live with Hindus and Sikhs and Christians by saying you can go to your churches, you can go to your mosques, you can go to your gurudwaras?
To begin with, I thought I'll ask Venkat a question. Now it seems I have to say a few words in defense of Venkat. No? All great historical events which turn out to be turning points in human history result from somebody's tactical mistakes or somebody's strategic mistakes. If people don't make tactical mistakes and historical, how will the history move? So explain a partition in terms of Congress tactical mistakes or Muslim League's wisdom or Gandhi being so bright in winning freedom but totally ineffective in trying to win over the Muslims. These are not tactical mistakes. They are events which have been moved by great historical forces. And I think this is not the time to go into historical force. The problem of understanding the partition of India is that the consequences were so terrible that now we cannot understand how can human being can undertake a project like this. The way to hell is paved with best intentions, but this turned out to be such a huge hell that we cannot understand human intentions now. So when you go back, it becomes very difficult. But we can understand these things by parallels of some sort. For instance, the Germans voted Hitler into power. Did they know the consequences? The Kerensky government and czars, they didn't carry on with the Duma. Did they know that the Bolshevik will take over? Did Lenin know that when I die after that, Stalin will come and decimate the entire thing? So therefore, Pakistan needs to be understood in terms of as clear an idea as the idea of Swaraj. Do you think the idea of Swaraj which Gandhi put forward was very clear? People voted for it. Similarly, the people voted for Pakistan. I want to stop here. Thank you.
Shashi's questions. Well, then we can also, move into the domain of counterfactual histories. What if these tactical mistakes were not made? So, we kind of pretty much stray into that territory. As regards your second question, that Mr. Jinnah makes this famous, 11th August speech, which says that, now, you can go to your temples and mosques and churches, but, we're all Pakistanis, so on and so forth. But as I point out in my book, the very same Mr. Jinnah in December of 1947, when it is asked of him, why don't you open the doors of the Muslim League to all of Pakistan's inhabitants, irrespective of their creed and, religion? Mr. Jinnah refuses, saying Pakistan is not ready for it. So the main vehicle of Pakistani nationalism is still restricted to people who are born Muslims, or people who profess Islam. So, what I say is that maybe that statement of Mr. Jinnah, rather than being a statement as far as his famed secular outlook is concerned, I think it's more of a pragmatic statement aimed at calming down the fires, because there is enormous amount of violence still going on. There are people still being forced to move. And this is something I kind of have said this in other places also, this whole idea of what does it mean to be secular? It doesn't have anything to do with your personal lifestyle choices. Just because I'm wearing, a suit or whatever it is, it's how you do your politics. And in that sense, I think Mr. Jinnah is profoundly non-secular. Even though he may be a non-believer and, famously cosmopolitan in his personal, public outlook, I don't think of him as a secular politician. The second question, Tarun's. The millenarian hopes, as far as this whole thing about Pakistan is concerned, yeah, there is, I was really quite astounded to kind of read not just this very, high-blown kind of idealism about it, or, the kind of, this is going to be a utopia of sorts, that this is only going to be, which is why I call the title is a new, creating a new Medina. And of course, this is picked up from Shabbir Ahmad Usmani, who says that we've had Medina created by the Prophet 1300 years earlier. After that, we have had Muslim regimes or regimes ruled by Muslims, but we've never had a truly Islamic state. And it is us, in the case of Pakistan, we're going to create a second Medina. And in fact, in the election campaign, Medina and Pakistan are used interchangeably. So they'll say, well, the Prophet created the first Pakistan in the Arabian Peninsula, and we are creating a second one in the Indian subcontinent. Or the Prophet created the first Medina, we are going to create a second Medina. The whole idea that, somebody like Raja Sahib Mahmudabad talks about this as a laboratory for Islam, where solutions for the evils of modernity, you're seeing fascism, you're seeing excesses under communism, the world is at war, there is destitution, starvation, killing, all this is happening. And so the idea is that we're going to find some real solutions to modern man's problems. And this is going to indeed become the beacon light for the rest of mankind, not just the Islamic world. And so some of these people like Khaliquz-Zaman and even Raja of Mahmudabad believe that this will become the nucleus for, again, the reunification of the Ummah under some broad political entity, or Khaliquz-Zaman calls it a Quranic state. So he says, let us not already talk about Pakistan as an Islamic state, because if you talk about an Islamic state, it should encompass all the Muslims of the world. We can't have territorial boundaries. And it's only when we have achieved that overall unification of the Ummah that we would have reached that stage. So what you have is some very highfalutin rhetoric about it, which also comes out in the poetry as far as the Pakistan movement is concerned. And I kind of look at some of it. Bhagwan, I'm sorry, I'm forgetting what was your question.
Statement.
Okay, okay. Anybody else?
Other questions? Yes, over there.
So I just want to, although I have not read your book, but I just want to understand, because a lot about the formation of Pakistan happened during the late 1936-32, when the formation of Executive Council happened, when Maulana Azad was the President of Congress. He also had represented many forums and had expressed strong opinions against the formation of Pakistan. What is your research or your findings actually talked about that? Bringing out Maulana Azad's opinion on the formation of Pakistan.
Okay, one of the things, what I try to do in this book is to kind of stay away from cliches or cliched figures. Yeah, so every time you talk about Pakistan, Iqbal has to be there, Jinnah has to be there, Maulana Azad has to be there. So these guys, invariably, the discussion kind of gravitates and, then revolves around these individuals. What I try to do in this book is to talk about other figures, who are also very, very important. So Shabbir Usmani is somebody that I talked about. And not many people know that this is the man who is, Pakistan's first and last Shaykh al-Islam. He's the man who is the guy who presides over Jinnah's state burial. And yesterday Khan Sahib told me that this was part of Mr. Jinnah's will, that Shabbir Ahmad Usmani should preside over his funeral. Yeah, so the state funeral is held according to Sunni ritual. The private rituals at home are done according to Shia custom. And thirdly, most importantly, he's the main force behind the objectives resolution passed by the Pakistan Constituent Assembly, which becomes the part of its preamble. Now, as far as Maulana Azad is concerned, he is reduced to a non-factor. The Muslim League is constantly calling him Rashtrapati. Congress ke Rashtrapati. Rashtrapati. He is also somebody, of course, who is put in jail very quickly, 42. So it's Azad, Patel, Nehru, G.B. Pant. They are kind of sharing one of the jails. I think they're all together. And so the people who are actually hitting the ground are some of these ulama belonging to the Jamaat ul-Ulama Hind. And I bring out two of these people. One is the first person that I talk about, who's someone who kind of assails the Pakistan resolution within 4 weeks of its being passed. A man by the name of Sayyid Muhammad Sajjad Bihari, who's the founder of the Imarat-e-Sharia in Patna. And he kind of comes up with a critique of both the hostage population theory, this idea of Pakistan becoming an Islamic state, so on and so forth. He sees this as pretty much a revelation which has come to the British, not to any of these people, you know. So it's British divide and rule theory. They're kind of playing it through their Muslim League lackeys, so to say. The other person I bring in is this man called Hifzur Rahman Sewharvi, who is an important leader of the Jamaat Ulema-e-Hind. Madani is, of course, the top leader, but he's just, just below Madani, so to say, and he comes up with a very comprehensive critique of the idea of Pakistan, and it's a fascinating critique. The thing is, it's not just printed in the form of a pamphlet. This is, again, serialized in this newspaper called Medina during the elections of 1945-46. And finally, this man called Maulvi Tufail Ahmad Manglori. I was told that our vice president's wife belongs to his family. He's not from Mangalore, he comes from Mangalore in Saharanpur district. And, he's known as a Maulvi because he has an impeccable dress sense. But otherwise, he's a fairly modern figure who plays cricket for the Aligarh 11, so on and so forth. And then he also has a critique of, Pakistan, and so on and so forth. So the thing that most people seem to sometimes forget, even some of my readers, when they kind of, accuse me of many things, I won't go into that, is the book is organized in terms of a series of intra-Muslim debates. Almost every chapter is a debate within the Muslim community on question of Hindustan or Pakistan or joining the Congress or the Muslim League, so on and so forth.
I'm afraid we must end this here. We've given 8:15 as the time to finish this. I'm sorry if you have questions. I think it's a testament to the richness of Venkat's book that it's provoked as many questions as it has, and I encourage you to go out and buy the book so that you can appreciate it in all its nuances and its length. I'd like to thank all my fellow panelists and especially Venkat for making this the occasion it's been. Thank you very much.
What we're going to do is to relaunch the paperback of this edition, and we have Shashi here, so we'll request him also on the stage with all of us to do a relaunch of the book.
This whole thing, his position, although he was very much a part of what about Pakistan में घोड़े के ऊपर this whole thing, his position, although he was very much a part of